What is up, YouTube? Uncommon Ramen here. Before I get into the video, if you like my videos, please hit that like and subscribe button. And if you want to be notified when they hit the internet, please hit that bell icon. And finally, if you feel the need to support me, hit me up on my Patreon at patreon.com/uncommonramen. Capital U, capital R. I do all this in my free time, so any amount of support can help me bring more of this content to you more often. All right, so with March of the Machines just a couple weeks away, and All Will Be One behind us, I felt like it was probably appropriate to do this fun little deck tech with Ixhel, Scion of Atraxa. This is just an upgrade to the precon. The precon out of the box is pretty cool right off the bat. We did have to make some upgrades to lands and a couple other things, so we're just going to jump in and take a look at what we have here. Ixhel is Abzan color, so white, black, green. It costs 1 white, black, green for a 2/5 with flying, vigilance, and toxic 2. And it has a corrupted mechanic. At the beginning of your end step, each opponent who has 3 or more poison counters exiles the top card of their library face down. You may look at those cards and play those cards for as long as they remain exiled, and you may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to cast those spells. So pretty cool idea. We want to get some poison counters out on our opponents. Each one of them needs to have at least 3, and then we can start using their deck against them. Now, I think one of the steepest downfalls here is that it is a poison deck, and you only need 10 counters on someone to kill them. So you become a target pretty quickly, especially when we start diving into the other stuff that's in here. Once you get 1 poison counter out, your opponents will pretty much have to find a way to get you out of the game pretty quickly, because there are tons of ways to proliferate. Between All Will Be One and War of the Spark, there were quite a few proliferate type cards. A lot of this you're going to see already in the deck, so if you're interested in the deck, go pick it up. It's actually really good out of the box. And then obviously on the land side, it gets a little expensive, but you'll see. Right, so we're going to take a look at creatures first. Let me pull that off camera. Oops. There's more creatures than I thought. All right. So we're going to start out with the Bilious Skull Dweller. It's just 1 black with the Death Touch Toxic mechanic. Toxic isn't nearly as powerful as Infect. However, again, you just need to get 1 poison counter on your opponents. So after that, it just comes down to the Infect. Really, the idea of having more Toxic on the table just ends up being a way to put more pressure on your opponents. Bilious Skull Dweller is a really good one in here because it only costs 1 to get out. Next we have Blight Mamba. This is an oldie but a goodie. This one is about the same, except that it has Infect. So the more power it has, the more damage it does. You can also regenerate this. Obviously this was before they did things like Hexproof and stuff like that, so, or Indestructible for that matter. And it costs 1 and a green for a 1/1. We got ourselves a Blight Belly Rat, another 2-cost 2/2 with Toxic 1, and if it dies, it proliferates. So that's where things get a little deadly. Your opponents may want to just keep chump blocking this if they don't want the proliferate to happen, especially if this comes out in the later game where it could possibly kill somebody. Granted, your opponents might also use that as a way to kill somebody, but you know. Then we got ourselves a Bloated Contaminator. 2 and a green for a 4/4 Trample Toxic 1. Trample with Toxic is great. Trample with Infect is great. Trample with Poison counters is great. When Bloated Contaminator deals combat damage to a player, proliferate. So again, we have another one of these things that is a huge threat with that proliferate mechanic. Got ourselves a Canker Bloom. This is just a good card in general. Whether it has, just because it doesn't have Toxic doesn't mean that this should not be in there. Canker Bloom is 1 and a green for a 3/2. You can pay 1 to sacrifice it to choose either to destroy an artifact, an enchantment, or proliferate. This is a very versatile card, especially in Commander. We ourselves a Containment Grafter 4 and a green for a 5/5 with Trample Toxic 1. Whenever one or more creatures you control deal combat damage to one or more players, you get to proliferate. And then this one has the Corrupted mechanic. So if, I think this is just one, if on opponent, yeah. So if at least one opponent at the beginning, or at the end of your end, or during your, my gosh, I'm good at this, guys. At the beginning of your end step, if an opponent has 3 or more poison counters, you get to draw a card. Then you may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield. What is not to like about that? We get a little bit of extra ramp just by having Corrupted out there. The fact that it has Trample, again, Trample with poison counters is just a really good thing. Next up, we have Evolution Sage. This is going to paint a target all over you. Evolution Sage has Landfall Proliferate, and that is just an incredible ability. Anytime you play a land, you proliferate, you could end a game pretty quickly here, especially if you ramp when you have this in play. That could potentially be deadly. Got ourselves a Gliss's Retriever. This is 5 and a green for a 6/6 haste Toxic 3, and it can't be blocked by creatures of power 2 less. So you can't chump this guy. You have to block it with something bigger. 3/3 could still be considered chump, but it doesn't have Trample, but it still could hit pretty easily. It has enough evasion to be kind of scary. Toxic 3 means that as soon as it hits a player, they're guaranteed to be corrupted, and this guy has a corrupted mechanic, so whenever Gliss's Retriever dies, you can exile it, and when you do, return X target cards from your graveyard to your hand, where X is the number of opponents who have 3 or more poison counters. So if you do this right, you can actually return up to 3 cards to your hand, graveyard to hand. Yeah. So it's like a Eternal Witness on steroids, except has to die instead of ETB and is significantly more expensive. We got Grateful Apparition. This one's really cool because it is a flyer. When it deals combat damage to a player, proliferate. So again, we have a deadly little combo here where we have this really good evasion keyword and proliferate on it. So your opponents will have to find a way to deal with this. We got Ixhel, another oldie but goodie. 1 and 2 black for a 2/1 infect. When Ixhel enters the battlefield, each player gets a poison counter. It does say each player, so that does mean you as well. So you got to be careful with that, because if your opponents are playing proliferate as well, they could potentially try and outpace you, especially if they're focusing on proliferate. But it's not actually that big of a deal. And again, the 2/1 infect body, pretty cool. Next, we got Ixhel Myrrh, 2 for a 1/1 infect. When Ixhel Myrrh becomes blocked, it gets +2/+2 until end of turn. So on block, it's going to kill a 3/3 guaranteed. It'll die as well, but Got ourselves a Myrrh Convert, 2 for a 2/1 toxic 1. You can tap it and pay 2 life to add 1 mana of any color. It's a very interesting mana dork. The toxic is really interesting. The whole card is kind of, it's not great, but it's not bad. We got Necrogen Rot Priest, 2 a black and a green for a 1/5 with Toxic 2. Whenever a creature you control with Toxic deals combat damage to a player, that player gets an additional poison counter. This set was trying to bring poison back without it being horrendously oppressive like Infect was. I think they failed at that kind of miserably, because instead of... while Toxic itself isn't that powerful by comparison to Infect, Proliferate is pretty powerful, and instead of giving the creatures Infect, they just loaded up the set with a bunch of cards that proliferate. Not to mention, they gave a whole bunch of spells ways to give poison counters as well, which, if I remember correctly, they didn't really have that in the other sets with poison counters. So, just a heads up. I don't think that they did a good job of nerfing poison counters here. Anyway, Toxic 2, whenever something deals poison counters, it's gonna double, or it's gonna get an additional poison counter. And then for 1 a black and a green, target creature you control with Toxic gains Death Touch until end of turn. That is super powerful. a large portion of the cards in here are either going to have Toxic or have Infect or have Proliferate, which is kind of just the theme of this whole thing. We've got Norn's Choirmaster, 3 and 2 white for a 5/4 flying first strike. Whenever a commander you control enters the battlefield or attacks, you get to Proliferate. The on-attack part is the scariest part about this. The commander has flying, so it already has a pretty good evasion keyword. So this can get really out of hand pretty quickly. Next up, we have Pestilent Siphoner 1 and a black for a 1/1 flying Toxic 1. Aside from having Infect, this card is pretty perfect for this deck. Got ourselves a Phyrexian Swarmlord. This is 4 and 2 green for a 4/4 Infect. At the beginning of your upkeep, put a 1/1 green insect creature token with Infect onto the battlefield for each poison counter your opponents have. This is a crazy, 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 crazy card. Obviously, if you end up trying to go the go wide strategy, which is not what this deck is all about, things like Triumph of the Hordes with this card can get insane. Probably end the game, I would say. But I don't know. Anyway, very good card. Got Plague Mur, another oldie but goodie. 2 for a 1/1 Infect. You can tap it for colorless mana. Pretty simple, very cool. We got that Infect. We got that Mana Dork ability. We got Plague Stinger. 1 and a black with flying Infect for a 1/1. Again, pretty perfect there. Right up there with the previous one that we looked at, the Pestilent Siphoner. With the only difference being that Pestilent Siphoner is Toxic, whereas Plague Stinger is Infect. So we got Rhea Ivor, Bane of Bladehold. Should you need to go the swing wide strategy, this is a fantastic way to do so. It's a 3/4 for 2, a white and a black. It has Battle Cry, and at the beginning of combat on your turn, the next time target creature would deal combat damage to 1 or more players this combat, prevent that damage. If damage is prevented this way, create that many 1/1 colorless Phyrexian Might artifact creature tokens with Toxic 1, and this creature cannot block. It's not quite as powerful as the Phyrexian Overlord, Phyrexian Swarmlord, but it has really interesting utility in here, and it does keep the pressure going on your opponents. Again, this deck is one of those, like, out of the box, when your opponents kind of see what it does, you are going to become a target pretty quickly, so you're gonna want to end the game as quickly as possible. Then we got Skrelv, the Defector Might. For 1 white, it is a 1/1 with Toxic 1. It cannot block. You can pay 1 white or 2 life and tap it. Choose a color. Another target creature you control gains Toxic 1 and Hexproof from that color until end of turn. It can't be blocked by creatures of that color this turn. So it's kind of like giving it protection from that color. I'm not really sure why they didn't say just give it protection from that color. I'm curious as to whether they're trying to move away from the whole protection from thing. But yeah, I don't know. Skrelv is just really, really, really freaking good. Right, we got Tyrannax Rex. This is 4 and 3 green for an 8/8. This spell cannot be countered. Trample, Toxic 4, Ward 4, and Haste. This card is a menace to society. If you can get this on the field, this thing is so hard to deal with. It has Haste, so it's probably going to be attacking the minute it hits the field. It's an 8/8 body with Trample, so it's probably going to deal combat damage. It is Toxic 4, which means that if it does deal combat damage, you're getting 4 poison tokens, and it has Ward 4, which makes it so hard to target after it hits the field, and in case you wanted to counter it, you just can't. We've got Venerated Rot Priest. This is 1 green for a 1/2 Toxic 1. Whenever a creature you control becomes the target of a spell or ability, target opponent gets target of a spell, target opponent gets a poison counter. This guy's a little MVP. For 1 green, he's probably on the table as soon as you draw him, and likely he has to be the target of the spell in order to keep him from being out of hand. But if your opponents start trying to target other things on the table, they just get poison counters for doing so. There is literally no downside to that. That's very cool. Got ourselves a Venomous Brutalizer, 2 and 2 green for a 4/4 Toxic 3. When Venomous Brutalizer enters the battlefield, you may pay 1 and a green. If you do, proliferate. This guy for 3 and 3 green enters the battlefield as a 4/4 but proliferates. It's not, in my opinion, the greatest thing, but it's not also the worst thing in the world. You do, even if you didn't want to do the proliferate thing, you could just outright cast this for 4 for a 4/4 with Toxic 3. I mean, that's really good. We've got the Viridian Corruptor. This is pretty standard. 1 and 2 green for Infect 2/2 when it enters the battlefield, destroy target artifact. This is just a really versatile card. The only thing I think that we don't have in here is a Glistener Elf from the old stuff, and I don't know if you necessarily need it. And then finally, we got Vishgraz. Yeah. The Doom Hive. 2, a white, a black, and a green for a 3/3 Menace. Toxic 1. When Vishgraz, the Doom Hive, enters the battlefield, create 3 1/1 colorless Phyrexian Might artifact creature tokens with Toxic 1, and this creature can't block. Vishgraz gets +1/+1 for each poison counter your opponents have. So again, can get really out of hand. Even if we just put 3 counters on each of our opponents, this guy is going to get +9/+9. That's just so good. Anyway, that's the creatures. Next up, we're going to take a look at instants. There's not super large amounts of instants here. We got Beast Within. This is just destroy a permanent and they get a 3/3 Beast. The downside is, okay, we give them a 3/3 Vanilla Beast. That's not a big downside. We got Carrion Call. Create 2 1/1 green Phyrexian insect creature tokens with Infect, so we can get more pressure on the table. Infectious Bite. Target creature you control deals deals damage equal to its power to target creature you don't control. Each opponent gets a poison counter. Again, this is what I was talking about when I said they started adding poison counters to spell cards. That kind of takes away the I guess nerf that you gave Infect, basically. Just because you gave them the Toxic ability, which is significantly less powerful than Infect, doesn't mean that you should then turn around and a ton of proliferate cards and cards that also aren't creatures that give poison counters. Like, that's kind of counterintuitive to the whole idea of bringing the poison level down a bit. But anyway, Infectious Bite, super good. We got Mortify, destroy target creature or enchantment, another versatile kill spell. We got ourselves a Noxious Revival. You could pay 2 life or 1 green to put target creature card on top of its owner's library. Get that nice recursion for some of the better pieces in this deck. We got a Putrefy, destroy target artifact or creature. It can't be regenerated. Again, a little bit of versatility here. We got a Source of Plowshares. We exile a creature. Its controller gains life equal to its power, so we can get around the indestructible keyword. We got Vraska's Fall. Each opponent sacrifices a creature or planeswalker and gets a poison counter. There is no downside to this. The fact that this only costs 3, I know that most of the time when we have an Edict effect, it only costs 2, but also 9 times out of 10, that Edict effect only affects 1 player. This one affects all players and gives all players poison. These are just really powerful cards. Right, next up is sorceries. There's a lot more sorceries in here than there are instants, and we start with a Culling Ritual. Even if you're using this Culling Ritual just to kill a bunch of your insects and mites, so that you can get a whole bunch of black and green mana, that's still pretty good value. It is a board wipe for anything that costs 2 or less, and you get black and green mana equal to you get black or green mana equal to the number of permanents that have been destroyed this way. Got our Cultivate. Pretty simple. Search your library for 2 basic land cards, 1 in hand, 1 on the battlefield tapped. We got Expand the Sphere. For 3 and green, you get to look at the top 6 cards of your library, put up to 2 land cards from among them onto the battlefield tapped, and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. If you put fewer than 2 lands onto the battlefield this way, you get to proliferate a number of times equal to the difference. This is a really versatile spell. Maybe you don't need the lands, so you get 2 proliferates for 4. Maybe you want 1 land and you don't need the second land. Okay, you get 1 proliferate and a land. Very versatile spell. We got Feed the Infection, 3 and a black. You draw 3 cards and you lose 3 life. But if we have at least one opponent who has 3 or more poison counters, each opponent who has 3 or more poison counters loses 3 life as well. So that's really cool. I don't think I have to go into much details on that. We got Geth Summons, 2 and 2 black. Return up to 1 target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. Corrupted for each opponent who has 3 or more poison counters. As you cast the spell, put up to 1 target creature card from that player's graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. This is a cool late game / mid game spell to get some of the neater cards, creature cards that your opponents have cast that ended up in their graveyard. We got Infectious Inquiry. For 3, you draw 2 cards, lose 2 life, and each opponent gets a poison counter. These are powerful cards. And again, it only costs 3 to do this. This is if your opponents are like on it when it comes to getting rid of your toxic creatures and getting rid of your infect creatures, you still have other ways to get poison counters out there that your opponents have to be careful of. And then from that point, it's just about the proliferate game. There is a problem with that. We got Nature's Lore. Pretty simple. Search your library for a forest card, put it on the battlefield, then shuffle. We got Night's Whisper. For 1 and a black, you get to draw 2 cards and lose 2 life. We got Noxious Assault. 3 and 2 green. Creatures you control get +2/+2 until end of turn, and whenever a creature blocks this turn, its controller gets a poison counter. It is a downgraded version of Triumph of the Hordes. It's much more fair. It does incentivize your opponents to be careful how they block. Then we got Painful Truths. For 3, 2 and a black. You draw X cards and lose X life, where X is the number of colors of mana you spent to cast the spell. In Abzan, you can do up to 3. Got Phyresis Outbreak. For 2 and a black, each opponent gets a poison counter. Then each creature your opponents control get -1/-1 until end of turn for each poison counter its controller has. This outright could be a board wipe. But also in the early game is another way just to get a whole bunch of poison counters out and start proliferating. Got Unnatural Restoration. For 1 and a green, return target permanent card from your graveyard to your hand and then proliferate. So it's not quite as effective as certain cards that allow you to return things from your graveyard, because usually in green you get to just target a card. This one specifically says permanent card, but in here that's perfectly fine. Likely a lot of your infect / toxic creatures are going to be dying, so this is a great way to get that back. And then on top of that, you get to proliferate, and you get to do all of that for just 2 mana. Got Vat Emergence. This one is 4 and a black. Put target creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control and then proliferate. So we're going to take something that might not even be ours, and then we're still going to proliferate. It's kind of bonkers. And then I believe finally, not finally, we have White Sun's Twilight. For X and 2 white, you gain X life. Create X 1/1 colorless Phyrexian Might artifact creature tokens with toxic 1 this creature can't block, and if X is 5 or more, destroy all other creatures. This is a painful one for your opponents to deal with. It can possibly be a one-sided board wipe, leaving you, well, I guess not necessarily one-sided. You still lose all your other creatures, but it leaves you with an army of 1/1 toxic mites that your opponents have to be very quick to deal with. Finally, we have Wormquake. For 4 and 2 green. Corrupted. Create an XX green Phyrexian worm creature token with trample and toxic 1, where X is the amount of mana spent to cast this spell. Then, for each opponent with 3 or more poison counters, you create another one of those tokens. It has flashback for 8 and 2 green. So at first, you get some 6/6s. Probably, if you did this right, 6/6/6s. But then when you flash it back, you get yourself 6 10/10s. Do they have trample? Yes, they have trample. That's so bad. Next up, we're going to look at artifacts. Artifacts are going to include rocks. So we have our Arcane Signet. It's pretty simple. We got a Chromatic Lantern for mana fixing. We have a Contagion Clasp. When it enters the battlefield, put a -1/-1 counter on target creature. For 4 and tapping it, you get to proliferate. This is a permanent little on the battlefield way to proliferate over and over again. We have our Felwar Stone. We have our Glistening Sphere. If Corrupted is activated, this thing taps for 3 mana of any one color, which is super good. When it enters the battlefield, you get to proliferate. The only downside to this card, besides the fact that it costs 3, is that it enters the battlefield tapped. We got our Golgari Signet. We have Grafted Exoskeleton, which is a really horrible equipment to be up against. Equipped creature gets +2/+2 and has Infect. The only downside here is if Grafted Exoskeleton becomes unattached from a permanent, you have to sacrifice that permanent. That's a small price to pay. Equips for 2. We got Phyrexian Atlas, another 3-cost mana rock. Adds 1 of any color, but if you have Corrupted, whenever Phyrexian Atlas becomes tapped, each opponent who has 3 or more poison counters also loses a life. We got our Soul Ring, and then we have our Trailblazers boots, pair of boots that I think are very much underplayed. Equipped creature has non-basic land walk, and you equip it for 2. In most decks, this is going to be a deadly thing because most decks run non-basic lands. You're going to have trouble with monocolor decks because they have a limited amount of non-basic lands usually. But in most decks that have 2 or more colors, you're going to see quite a few non-basic lands, and this guy is just going to be able to let you swing in without being blocked. Next up, we have enchantments. We got ourselves a Ghostly Prison. This came with the deck, and I was actually kind of surprised that they didn't use Norn's Annex instead, but I guess it is what it is. Creatures can't attack you unless they pay 2, or unless its controller pays 2 colorless mana for each creature attacking them. We got Moldavine Reclamation, 3 and a black and a green. Whenever a creature you control dies, you gain 1 life and draw a card. This is going to happen quite often because, again, you're playing Infect and your opponents are, well, Infect and Toxic, and your opponents are going to want to deal with your creatures pretty often. So the sooner you get this out, the more value you get out of this. Got Norn's Decree for 3. Whenever 1 or more creatures an opponent controls deals combat damage to you, that opponent gets a poison counter. And whenever a player attacks, if 1 or more players being attacked are poisoned, the attacking players draw a card. So we are disincentivizing attacking us because, you get poisoned for doing so. And we are incentivizing attacking people who have poison counters because then those players get to draw cards for attacking those players. It's a really interesting political piece in this deck. Got Phyrexian Arena. It's just a draw card engine. At the beginning of your upkeep, you draw a card and lose a life. It's not the greatest thing in the entire world, but it is a pretty good staple in black for a lot of reasons. And then finally, we have Skrelv's Hive for 1 and a white. At the beginning of your upkeep, you lose 1 life and create a 1/1 colorless Phyrexian Might artifact creature token with toxic 1. And this creature can't be blocked. As long as an opponent has 3 or more poison counters, creatures you control with Toxic also have Lifelink. This is the next new Bitter Blossom, up there with Dreadhorde Invasion, I believe is what it's called, and obviously Bitter Blossom. Very good card. The Corrupted mechanic here is really good with the lifelink, so there are a lot of cards of Toxic in here. Even your commander having lifelink just means every time you're swinging in, you're also gaining 2 life. Can't go wrong with this. There's almost no downside to that. Actually, I guess there's no downside, especially for how cheap it is. Then we're going to look at Planeswalkers. We have one. We have Vraska, Betrayal Sting. This is 4 and 2 black, or 4 a black and 2 life. If you pay the 2 life, it enters with 2 fewer loyalty counters, so it would enter with 6, otherwise it enters with 4. For 0, you draw a card, and you lose a life, and you proliferate. For -2, target creature becomes a treasure artifact. And loses all other types and abilities. It's not quite the Oko Elk, but it's still pretty good. It's like Minimus Containment, I think is what it's called. And then finally, for -9, if target player has fewer than 9 poison counters, they get a number of poison counters equal to the difference. And again, this is just about proliferate. She doesn't have a +1 because her 0 is a +1 essentially because it proliferates, and we have so many ways to proliferate in this deck that it kind of gets scary very quickly, and you can just instantly for -9 bring somebody up to 9 poison counters. Right. Well, next up we're gonna look at non-basic lands. Last of the interesting cards here. If you're running black, you're running Bojuka Bog. It's Graveyard Hate. Enters tap, but taps for black, and when it does enter, exile target player's graveyard. Canopy Vista. Check land for green-white that also has basic land typings. We got our Command Tower. We got our Exotic Orchard. Got a Fortified Village. Another check land for green-white. We have Godless Shrine. Shock land for black-white. We have Indatha Triome. This is a Triome land for white, black, green, and also has basic land typings. We got our Karn's Bastion, which I was really surprised that this actually came in the deck. I figured this is something they would leave out and force you to pick up yourself. Karn's Bastion is in this deck. It taps for colorless, or you can tap 4 and it to proliferate. So it's right up there with the Contagion Clasp, and it's a lot stickier than the Contagion Clasp. Got ourselves a Crozen Verge. Enters battlefield tapped. You can tap it for colorless, or you can tap it 2 and it to sacrifice it to search for a forest or plains. Does not have to be basic, so any forest or plains you have in your deck. I think you put it in your hand, or do you put it on the battlefield tap? Onto the battlefield tapped. We got Myriad Landscape. Enters tapped. Taps for colorless. You can tap 2 it and sacrifice it to search your library for 2 basic land types that share a type and put them onto the battlefield tap, then shuffle. Got Necroblossom Snarl. This is a land where you reveal either a swamp or forest, otherwise it enters tapped and it's green-black. We got Overgrown Tomb, shock land for green-black. We got Path of Ancestry, enters the battlefield tap, taps for any color. If this is spent on a creature that shares a creature type with your commander, you also get to scry 1. Got Sandstep Citadel. It is the Triumph for white, black, green that does not have basic land typings. Shine Shadow Snarl. This is another one where you reveal either a plains or a swamp, otherwise it enters tapped and it taps for black, white. Got Sungrass Prairie. This is a filter for green-white. We've got Tainted Field. Taps for colorless, or it taps for black and white if you control a swamp. We've got Tainted Wood. Taps for colorless, or it taps for black-green if you control a swamp. We've got Temple of Malady. Scryland for black-green. We have Temple of Plenty. Scryland for green-white. And we have Temple of Silence. Scryland for black-white. And lastly, we have our basic lands. Starting with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 forests, 1, 2 plains, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 swamps. So that is my rework of the Ixhel Scion of Atraxa deck. Like I said, I would say a lot of this already came with the deck. It was a precon right next to the, I think it was red green rebel precon, and there's very little you have to do outside the box. There's quite a few lands that you probably want to swap out to help with the mana base and also help with the speed of the deck, because you want to switch out some of those tap lands for something that has the possibility of coming into play untapped. There were a few cards in here there were a few cards with Infect/Toxic that weren't in here that probably should have been in here, and a handful of cards as well that were in here that probably weren't nearly as synergistic as they could have been. But outside the box, still pretty good precon. And again, I think it's appropriate because we're just between the All Will Be One set and the March of Machines set, which is going to be dropping, I believe, on the 21st of April. So we are right in the middle of the Phyrexian War. So yeah, I felt like this was a great time to showcase this. And that's it. If you have any questions or comments, leave those down below. Keep it positive. I will remove negative comments. And I think that's it, guys. Until next time. Peace.